continuing education, spending the week together. We're all pastors around the country, and so it's been such a source of support, ideas, creativity. We laugh, we learn, we study, we pray, we drink wine. We have a lot of fun together, and we pray for each other throughout the year. So this really, in part, why I think I am a pretty healthy pastor today is due in large part to my sisters in spirit. So. Okay, and then I had some time with my family. I got to celebrate Mother's Day with my mother and two of my sisters, and Oakmont Bakery treats, of course. And then I was actually invited, it was such an honor, to be the baccalaureate speaker at Westminster College on May 14th. And so I went up to Westminster and was able to give the baccalaureate address to the graduating students as well as their parents, and processed it with the president, wearing my academic regalia, so that was such a treat. Oh, sorry, because I'm an alum of Westminster. Thank you for mentioning that. Forgot. And then this is some pictures of Westminster. It was a gorgeous day, so I hadn't been back for a long time. Valerie is back there. She's an alum, too. Hey, Valerie. Go Westminster. So I did some walking around. So Old Main is where I graduated from in 1990, and Wallace Chapel, where Brian and I met and were married in 1991. So that is a special place for us as well. And I finally finished up editing my third book, and this is called For Every Matter Under Heaven, Preaching on Special Occasions. I co-authored it with Beverly Zink Sawyer, a friend of mine, and this will help pastors preach in weddings, funerals, crises in the world, kind of whatever beyond kind of a Sunday morning normal sermon, to help give them resources for that. So it was a great fun to write it. Some of you are probably in the book. No, I did ask for permission to use a couple stories to protect my innocence. All right, and then I got to go to Boston, May 20th. Rebecca graduated from Simmons University with a dual master's degree in history and library science. So that was such a wonderful day to celebrate with her after 3 years of study. So just some pictures of us there. It was right on the water. It was absolutely gorgeous. And then we went to Simmons and saw where she went. Got a couple pictures of her in the Athenaeum Library, which is where she's been working for the past 2 years. So it was just such a joy to celebrate. Congratulations, Rebecca. And here's to the graduate, her 2 degrees, and my mom came along for the trip too, which was, this was the first time that Rebecca hasn't had all 4 grandparents there to celebrate a major life event. So it was hard not to have my dad and Linda and Al, but my mom was representing the grandparents. And then, of course, we had to have some time with my son. So Christian pitches for the College of Worcester. And so we went to the College of Worcester and saw a game, and then we actually went to Salisbury, Maryland, and we cheered him and the Fighting Scots on in the Super Regional game, and on June 4th, and they were just shy of the College World Series. It was the best of 3, and they won 1 game, and the other team won the third game, so it was so close. We're hoping next year he's a senior to go all the way. So my mom, I spent a lot of time with her. She continues to grieve the death of my father, and he's buried at the Swickley Cemetery. So she really wanted to make it a more special place. So we planted some flowers and spent some time there as well. And then my sister Tina retired after 30 years of teaching high school math, AP calculus, and statistics. So she is happy to be, and I bought her that shirt, and it says something like, "I'm retired, not my problem anymore." So that was really fun to be able to actually go and celebrate with her. So then our great adventure, which is why you really came, to hear about Scotland. So we left Boston and flew to London. It was a direct flight. It was 2 hours late, and I'll get to that in just a minute. But I wanted to read this is my little journal that the session got me, so I'm not going to read the whole thing, but a few little highlights. So this is when we got to Boston. This was what I'll remember most. Rebecca walking up to us in the line for checking into our Delta flight. She was dropped off by her roommate. In that moment, it struck me that all my hopes and plans for international sabbatical trip had finally come true. After waiting for 2 years, I was taking our family to Scotland. So off we went. Now, of course, the plane was 2 hours late, which presented a problem on the other end. So we missed our train going from London to Edinburgh. So since we didn't have tickets on the later train, a guy named Charlie, I think was his name, right? They said, just go see Charlie, we'll help you. So he said, well, just get on the next train. So we did. We sat down, and then we proceeded throughout that trip of people coming up and saying, you're sitting in my seat. You're sitting in my seat. So we just had to keep moving around until we finally found seats that nobody was going to claim. And then we finally got to Edinburgh. So as soon as we arrived, we put our stuff in the hotel and went down to the Royal Mile as fast as we could. And we're just walking along. And this was like one of the first things we saw, this bagpiper just standing there on the streets. All right, so you get a little taste. So the picture on the left, that's just, you get a sense of how old this place is, right? Look at the streets and the buildings, and it just holds so much history. And just a couple of fun pictures of the fam. So we were thrilled, Brian especially, to find, you want to model your tie there, sir? So the Johnston tartan, we did not get a kilt, but Brian got a tie. He's had that tie. And each of us in the family got a Johnston tartan scarf. So that will keep us warm this winter. And we saw the name Johnston in lots of different places, which was very fun as well. Uh-oh, Rebecca, I did something. What am I going to do without you, Rebecca? I don't know either. Just get me going again.
Maybe because you didn't
Okay, I will just keep my finger on it. Okay, and then we went to St. Giles Cathedral, and you don't need to read all this, and I won't either, but it was founded in 1124 by King David I, became a Roman Catholic church, and then Reformer John Knox preached there in 1559 and stripped it of its Catholic decorations. Scotland became a Protestant country, as you know, and then it was in a state of disrepair for a while. And then King Charles I attempted to impose Anglican worship. There were riots, and then the Scotland's religious freedoms were upheld through the signing of the National Covenant, which kept it as a Protestant country. So Brian got a book while we were there called Bloody Scotland, and there's a lot of bloody history there, as well as religious fighting. So that's part of the story of Scotland. So we went to St. Giles. There's John Knox himself, my buds, hanging out with him. And the pulpit, as well as, that's the parking lot. And believe it or not, that's where John Knox is buried. So crazy. But he was buried in a garden there, and then the garden was moved. It was turned into a parking lot. But some Scots really think that's great. It's just very austere, and that's the way it should be. So beautiful, beautiful ceilings. I always look up when I go into cathedrals, and your eye is just in store for such a treat. Gorgeous organ that Tim would have loved. And we went all the way to Scotland And the choir performing that day was from Cincinnati, Ohio. So here's just a little bit of what they were singing. Okay. And this is just something I wrote. I loved being in that historic place. Brian and I went to worship there for a service, and he said, as we were sitting there, this is the first time I've worshipped you in a long time. Nice to hold hands and pray. So here we are outside the St. Giles Cathedral. And then just walking around Edinburgh, got some pictures of different things that we were looking at and enjoying. Holyrood Palace, which we missed, they just closed. We didn't get a tour, but it's the official residence of the British monarchy. Since the 16th century, Queen Elizabeth II spends 1 week there every year to take care of different engagements and ceremonies. And it is a place you can tour if you're interested in going back. So this was kind of fun. Any J.K. Rowling, Harry Potter fans out there? So we found out that this place, the Elephant House, there is where J.K. Rowling spent a lot of time. It's a coffee house. So she spent a lot of time there writing Harry Potter. And while she was looking for inspiration, which happens when you're writing a book, you need to get up and get out. So she walked around the cemetery. And this on the bottom, we came across the tombstone, and it says, in the memory of Thomas Riddle. So that's one of the characters in her book. So that was kind of fun to find where she got inspiration. And to the left, that is a school behind the gates, and it looks very much like Hogwarts. So it was just fun to kind of be in her place where she wrote and see where she was inspired. So we went to Glasgow the next day and went to the Kellingrove Art Gallery and Museum. And this was a fascinating place. Dolly's Crucifixion, which is a very famous piece of art, was supposed to be there. And our guides on the bus spent a lot of time telling us about it. And we ran right up to where it was supposed to be, and it was on loan. So we didn't get to see it. However, yeah, it was probably in Cincinnati, exactly. So we didn't get to see it, but we saw a Monet that was gorgeous, and a set of 3 pieces, this is here on the left, 3 pieces that were done on flour sacks. And Rebecca actually wandered into this room, being a good reference librarian that she is, and curious about things. So she found this and said, you got to come see. So it was during World War II at a prisoner of war camp. A general permitted the prisoners to worship and pray in a hut and allowed them to draw and paint these pictures of Mary and Joseph and the angels to give them a little sense of peace and sanctuary. Thank you. Just preached on that. A place where they could go that had meaning for them in the midst of this horror of war, right? And so these pieces, these flour sacks, were actually, and at the end of the war, they kind of cut them off and took them, and somehow they ended up back to this museum where people could see them. And it was just an amazing story as I was looking for stories this summer. So on the road to the Highlands, that was our bus that we were friends with throughout the whole week. This is called a passing place. If anyone's ever been to Scotland, the roads are just one way. I mean, they're 2-way roads, but it's one lane. And we were in this huge bus, which I just showed you. And can you imagine, you come up, and every once in a while there's this little side, little extra road there called a passing place. And you just have to work it out with the person who's coming there. Somebody has to be willing to pull over so you can go through or vice versa. And we did this throughout, these tiny little roads all over Scotland, and we were not in an accident. So, it works when they all know the drill and work together. So Loch Lomond, Loch means lake, and we saw a lot of beautiful lakes. We did not. We looked for it, but it was elusive. So just gorgeous. These are just little pictures from the bus as I was driving, around. So I'm sure if Steve Mellon were there, they would be better. But and then on the ferry, we spent a lot of time, and that weather was pretty typical of Scotland. So it's at the same latitude as Alaska, so it's pretty cold and rainy. They don't get a lot of snow like Alaska, but they get a lot of rain. So we were glad we had layers. And again, on the waters, seeing castles throughout. We went to Tobermory on the Isle of Mull, which a lot of the houses were this kind of all the same color, like a tan or a gray. So this was the first time I saw like a pop of color, and I was really happy to see it. The Western Isle Hotel was fabulous. It was a very old hotel right there on the water. We had incredible food, and I was introduced to Iona gin for a gin and tonic, and I highly recommend it. When I got back, Brian tried to order it, and they don't ship it. So anyway, but we ate there right there on the water. And this was our view from our window, Brian and I. We were on the 3rd floor, and we looked out over this. So then we went on another ferry to the Isle of Iona, which is what I talked a little bit about in my sermon today. So in 563, St. Columba and monks arrived from Ireland, and this became known as the cradle of Christianity in Scotland, introduced as Celtic Christianity. Iona became the center for learning, healing, and hospitality. Of course, there was a Viking that destroyed all of that. So many monks were killed in the Martyrs' Bay, and the rest of them moved to safer shores in Ireland. It is thought that the Book of Kells, if any of you have ever heard of that, it's a gorgeous illustrated book of the Bible, gorgeous pictures, and they took that with them to Ireland for safekeeping, which is good thing they did, and it's now in Dublin today as well. So the center of Christianity, Scottish Christianity, shifted then to St. Andrews, where we had pilgrimages to the St. Andrews Cathedral. But today, Iona is, as I said, it's a very small island, population of maybe 200, but there are about 130,000 visitors each year. So it still has that draw, that aura, that thin place where people seek to go. So it is a gorgeous place, and I highly recommend it. It is tough to get there, so you do have to. I'm reading now. So I'll share one thing while Rebecca fixes that. When I pause, it goes on. It goes on. So when I was at Iona, we did a little shopping in the midst of also seeing these incredible views. Oh, let me say one word before I talk about shopping. So here's the Abbey, and that was, built when Columba got there in 563, a very, rudimentary version. Of course, that was destroyed by the Vikings, but they've built on throughout the centuries. So it's dated by about the 12th century, some parts of it. And there are crosses everywhere. So the cross on the left is St. Martin's Cross, and they think that was probably carved at about the 6th to 8th century, and it's still standing, which is really amazing. And part of the trick was that circle that's the Celtic cross, right? is that if you can imagine, and I'm not an architect or an engineer, but can you imagine if you have arms out like this to have some support, right? And so that's what kept the crosses from disintegrating, is having that support. And the one on the right is from the 1500s, and that was a time where a lot of pilgrims came and they would pass by this cross. Now, why are these important? Well, there were thousands of crosses in the British Isles at this time because books were very expensive to print and most people were illiterate. So crosses inscribed with pictures from the Bible actually told the story. And that was the way that people could understand what the story of Jesus was all about without a book. So the crosses were really important, and amazing that they still stand today. This is a peek inside the Abbey, which is absolutely amazing. So my little joke in the right-hand corner, if you can see that man's face that looks like he's in anguish, that is right above the pulpit. And they say it was put there intentionally by one of the craftsmen so that if preachers would be going on too long, they would look up and see that poor soul and they would like cut it short. So there is the pulpit I stood in, just to be fun. And the cloisters around in the middle of the Abbey are just, again, if you can imagine, the monks and people just walking around there praying. For me, what's one of the most powerful places in this is the Abbey. When the stones, I just look at those stones and I touch them, and I imagine the pilgrims for centuries going into this place and praying and singing, and I just imagine the stones absorbing all of these prayers throughout the centuries. If the stones could speak, they would have a story to tell. So Christian in front of a cross, and the one up here in the museum, that they think is the oldest stone cross, and it was probably done just around 500. That still survives. So they put it in a museum behind the Abbey so they could preserve it. So just a quote, "A wave is driven by wave, and each pursues the wave ahead. So time flies on and follows, always, forever and new. What was before is left behind, what never was is now, and every passing moment is renewed." So that's a sense you have at Iona. One last thing, we did do a little shopping, and you were so kind to give me some money before I left as a gift for my sabbatical, and I decided the best way to spend that was to buy a stole. So I actually, and this was a little expensive, I wouldn't have bought it myself, so thank you. But it was in the store at Iona, and it was absolutely gorgeous, and it struck my eye, and I said, I think that's something I could use the money for, to say thank you, and to bring our heritage back. And so when I wear it on Sundays, I can be connected to Iona and to you. So thank you very much. All right, so then we go from religion and spirituality to the bloody battles, and that's kind of a big part of Scotland as well. So we went to Culloden Battlefield, and so this was in 1745, the uprising, Jacobite uprising against the government. The government did end up defeating them, killing 2,000 men. What was the most sad for me, besides the number of deaths, which was significant, is that Scottish culture was forever affected. So wearing of tartans was banned, and everything kind of that was important to their culture was banned at that time. So that has, obviously has come back somewhat, but, it was kind of forever changed in that moment. So then on to a church, St. John's Kirk, or church in Perth. And this is named for John the Baptist and John the Divine in the Gospel. It was began in 1126. It was consecrated in 1242. John Knox preached a sermon there against the idolatry of the Roman Catholic Church in 1559, which really began the Scottish Reformation. There are 63 bells in the Carillon. It's the largest collection in the UK. And I was going to buy a CD of the bells, but I don't have a CD player. So I thought I could probably find it online. right, so beautiful windows. And again, just keeping in mind how old the church is. Just for centuries it has been standing. It's a local parish today. So the elders met us there to give us a tour. So it is both a piece of history as well as a local congregation. So then we went on to the Royal George Hotel, and it was called the George Hotel, but when Queen Victoria visited there, she liked it so much, so they asked if they could put the word royal before their name, so there you have it. So it's a very old historic hotel, and that was my view outside my window, the bridge, and then lights on at night, so it was just gorgeous. And of course, you can't go to Scotland without a little whiskey tasting. To be honest, I'm not a whiskey fan, but you can see the one on the right I particularly liked, so I drank most of it. And sadly, my son Christian, this was really the only reason he really wanted to go to Scotland, truth be told. And sadly, he got food poisoning the night before. So he and Brian were back at the hotel, and so I had to get a little bottle to bring back for them. So Rebecca and I then went on to Stirling Castle, and this was built in the 12th century. It is an incredible facade. I mean, it's built on volcanic rock, steep cliffs. I mean, whoever decided to build this was really smart, because there's just no way you could invade this place. They still have cannonballs that are visible in the walls. It was the center of government and the Scottish royal residence. Mary, Queen of Scots, lived there at one point. There was a baptism there of James VI, and lots of fanfare for that. And then the chapel was built to baptize his son, Prince Henry. So it was an interesting place, again, combining history, warfare, politics, as well as religion. Gorgeous views from the top. And as you can see, being up there with the cannon, you're pretty safe. And then we go out into the courtyard, and of course, we have to hear a little Scotland the Brave. So then we went on to the William Wallace Monument. Some of you have probably heard of him, Braveheart, anyone? Although our guide said, don't think of Braveheart, because the movie is nothing like the stories. Anyway. So he won a decisive battle there at the Stirling Bridge in 1297. And so Rebecca and I and one of her friends from the trip, we walked 246 steps to the top, but it was well worth the view. Absolutely amazing. So then on to St. Andrew's, and I mentioned earlier about St. Andrew's being the place of pilgrimage. So I preached before I left on St. Andrew from the Bible. One of the disciples is believed to have gotten as far as Scotland, and that's why they call it St. Andrew's. So a beautiful chapel Cathedral, was built, and people would pilgrimage there every year. And the good and the bad of the Reformation is that it took away pilgrimages. So people no longer had to go, and so it fell into disrepair, mainly because people living in St. Andrews, again, these are Scots who were very frugal and resourceful. And so they said, hey, honey, we need some stones for our garden. Why don't we just go down to the cathedral and get those stones? And so some people did. They started going and they just took it apart and took it back to their yard. So some people are sad about that. Others think it says a lot about Scotland and how people live and kind of spreading the Celtic Christianity of the earth, kind of spreading it from cathedral to people's homes. So St. Andrews, which some of you probably know the name more so with, golf, right? We were there as they were setting up for the 150th Open. So they were putting all the bleachers there. People were out kind of testing out the green. Bob, have you been there? It's on your list? Yeah. But to be honest, we didn't understand how anybody could play golf there. I'm not a golfer, but the wind is amazing. So I think they have to play a special kind of golf. So St. Andrews Cathedral I just talked about. And we went to a little local church, which was so cool. And this was the pastor, of course, wearing his tartan stole. But it was just a delightful little worship service there. St. Andrews University, of course, is where Prince William and Princess Kate met. So we got to see the dorm where they fell in love. So, of course, there was Callaway bags everywhere. So lots of golf stores in the midst of this old place. And then, of course, meat pies were very good. Both vegetarian and meat. Right, Rebecca? They were good. Well, haggis was reserved for the last meal to celebrate. And sadly, I did not. It looked pretty bad. Now, I have tried it before. Did you? Okay, well, good. You are braver than I. Yeah, exactly. Don't look it up, what it is. Let's see. Oh, okay, and this is right by where I showed you the golf green. This is right there at the beach, and this is where the Chariots of Fire film was filmed. So, cue da 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 da. Okay, and then we went back to Edinburgh to kind of finish up our trip and then head to the next. So just real quick, there's a cemetery right behind this place. And if you can see the little dog on the top of Edinburgh, his name is Bobby. So this was named after him. Why? Well, because when when the owner of the dog, he died and was buried in that cemetery. And the little dog Bobby would go every day and sit on his grave for the whole day. He did this for 14 years. And so people would see this and notice they knew it was happening, and so they decided to name the pub after. So just different places in Edinburgh. So there's a pub on the left, and it says, Mary Queen of Scots probably drank here. So there's a marketing ploy for you. Scottish grocer, and then, of course, you can get a kilt made anywhere in Edinburgh. So a little fun here. So the one on the right, that is where they think J.K. Rowling got the idea of Diagon Alley. And if you've read the books or seen the movies, you can kind of see that. And, of course, we got some good food there. And then on the left, I found out that my one book, Claiming the Call to Preach, was actually at this library, National Library of Scotland. So we went and asked the director if we could see the book, and I said, just for fun, it's my book, I just want to see it here. And she said it wasn't there. So I'm hoping somebody had checked it out. Yeah. All right, so this is the end of our trip. So as you can see, a good group there. We all got Scottish scarves to send us off, and we are on our way. So, and if you ever want to see Scotland, I would recommend the tour company. It's called SCOTUS Tours. Jim Wallace is an ordained minister from Scotland, as well as he was in the United States for a while. Okay, so this is Goodbye Scotland, and I don't know if you can see that up on the top. It says there are 2 seasons in Scotland, June and winter. And that was pretty much, we were there in June, but it was still chilly. So hey, see you back. Okay, so then from Scotland, we got on the train, which proved to be interesting because they decided to strike while we were there. So we weren't sure if we were going to have a train. We were able to get to London, but the whole underground was shut down by a strike. So we had to get Uber. So here we all are. And the Tower of London, if you've never been, I would highly recommend it. It was much different than I thought. It was more than just an execution chamber. So it was built in the 1070s by William the Conqueror. It's a grand palace and royal residence. It was used as a prison. Anne Boleyn and Jeanne Grey were both killed there by wives of Henry VIII. And there's a nice monument there to remember them. Of course, there's stories of ghosts haunting the tower. I didn't experience any, but I'm sure they're there. It was also a mint. It made the money. It was an armory warehouse and museum, and it was a zoo. So what do you get? A member of the royal family that has everything? You get them an exotic pet. And so they brought in like lions and what else? Polar bear, like monkeys all over the world until they realized it was dangerous and they were biting people. So.
Did you see the raid?
Yes, the ravens are there. Yeah. So the yeoman warriors, or the warders, or the families are there. So the guy that left is called a yeoman, or a beefeater, and they're there to protect the crown jewels, and they host 3 million visitors a day. And what's really cool is the yeomen and their families live there at the Tower of London. So it's their own little community. They have a chapel, they have a school. It's a community of people that live at the Tower of London. Could you imagine having a play date? Like, hey, Mom, can I go over and play at the Tower of London with my friend? So Rebecca and her friend Kayla, a college roommate, flew from Geneva, Switzerland, where she was studying, to London for the day so they could visit. And we got tickets for the Shakespeare's Globe to see King Lear, and we were all excited, and we're there waiting for them to open the gates. And I look at my email, and it says, due to COVID, so most of the cast had COVID, so they had to cancel the performance. So sadly, we didn't get to go. So then, believe it or not, Christian's roommate from college, Ryan, his family was in London, and at the same time, so we met them at a pub and had dinner. So it was really cool that both of our kids happened to be able to have some time with their college friends there while we traveled. Look at that. Anybody want to dig into that? So this was just on the streets of London, just all kinds of cool places to see and to eat. Of course, Big Ben, the London Eye, the Underground, the double-decker buses, iconic sights of London. One of my favorite pictures on the left here, so that's Harry Potter, and then if you can see, look past Harry Potter, and that's William Shakespeare. And I think that picture tells a lot about London. So, and there we are just taken in the town. So British Museum's another one I'd highly, highly recommend. I would say give it a week to visit. We only had, 4 hours maybe to see all of civilization, but we did the best we could. So here's some highlights. We saw the Rosetta Stone, of course, and Easter Island, and then all the mummies that were preserved. Unbelievable that, that they have been preserved all of these centuries. It's really incredible. So Buckingham Palace, of course, and Westminster Abbey. We got to go to an evensong service there, which was just so special. Angelic choir and again, you just look up and you're amazed at all the beauty and magnificence of that place. So a big part of this trip was just being with my family. I've traveled internationally before, alone, but never with my family. So that was really such a gift to experience it with them together. So we came home to Sadie, and she, who stayed in the kennel for 2 weeks, was very happy to see us. So at home, I was able to go to the fireworks up in New Wilmington with Linda and Al for 4th of July, go biking, plant a garden. And then back to Delaware for my nephew Mitchell. I was there when he was born, so it's hard to believe that he is old enough to be married. And it was at a Roman Catholic church, but they actually asked if I could give the homily. And I did come prepared with one, but I was fully expecting the priest to say, no thank you. However, he was very welcoming, and at the wedding he even introduced me as Donna, who is an ordained minister, will give the sermon. I was shocked. So it was lovely to be able to participate, and those are all my sisters and my mom. So then we went to Geneva, New York, one of the Finger Lakes, Seneca Lake, and we stayed there with all my sisters and my mom. We've never done this in all these years, just getting away with the women, so it was such a delight to be there together. And of course, in Seneca Falls, you have to visit the National Women's Rights Convention. So this was held in Seneca Falls in 1848. Elizabeth Cady Stanton drafted and people signed the Declaration of Sentiments, which called for women's equality and suffrage. And she writes, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal." And so it was. So this is historical, and they had these different proposals that they wanted to vote on. All of them were unanimous except for the suffrage, for women to be able to vote. And so they said, well, that's very controversial, so we're going to hold that one until later. Frederick Douglass was there. He stood up and he said, if you don't pass this one, none of the other ones matter. Women have to be able to vote. And so it was passed. So, of course, it took many more years after this, not till 1920 was the 19th Amendment ratified. But, however, this was a really important step in the history of women's rights. So there's the corner, and there's the Declaration of Sentiments engraved on the wall. So I had all my sisters and mom pretend like they were signing it. And so It's a Wonderful Life. Any fans out there? Yeah? So it wasn't filmed in Seneca Falls. However, Seneca Falls was the inspiration for the town. It's very idyllic, very much like you see on Bedford Falls, right? And it's true, there's actually a bridge where a man was going to commit suicide, jumped off the bridge, and somebody rescued him and gave his life to save the other person, I think is how the story goes. So with that, they still have the bridge, and they have little bells that people put on there for clearances, wings, and stuff. And they have this museum that has all this paraphernalia that people from the movie have given over the years. So if you're a It's a Wonderful Life fan, it's kind of worth the trip to go to Seneca Falls to see that. Beautiful, beautiful lake views, of course. So then we went to Boston. I meant to add up all my miles this summer, but I forgot. But I was traveling a lot. So Rebecca, as we said, graduated, so we had to pick her up and bring her home. So we moved her from Boston, and while we were there, of course, we went to Fenway Park. It was one of the worst games, literally, in history. It was the one you might have seen where the Red Sox lost, I think it was 28-3 or something like that, and against the Blue Jays. And they almost set a record for the most number of runs ever scored against them. So that was the game we were at. We left early. Of course, there's my son being very helpful in the moving process. And then I just had some fun time in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's a great city. And I've told people, as you all tell me the things you do in Pittsburgh, I say, gosh, I just haven't taken advantage of it. I don't have time. I don't make time. So we actually had some time And we went some biking in Pittsburgh along the Heritage Trail, I think it's called. It was awesome. Went to a Pirates game. They lost, which is no surprise, but it was actually a better game. And then we treated ourselves to a nice dinner at Off the Hook, if you've ever been there. A really wonderful seafood. Christian loves swordfish and was looking forward to that because they said we fly in this seafood every day. And so he loves swordfish. So he says, and we were kind of celebrating his 21st birthday too. So he says, okay, I'll have the swordfish. And the man said, oh, it's the one fish we don't have today. So I guess we'll have to go back. So Sadie's sabbatical was good to the last drop. All right, that's all the pictures I have. So if we can get the lights, Donna, thank you. Thank you. So overall, it was an amazing summer. Like I said, lots of travel, lots of good time with family, lots of time to just kind of be in a different rhythm. So thank you for the time, for the support, and yeah, for your prayers. I was certainly praying for you as well. I'm glad to come back to see you. So any quick questions before we end for the day?
Was there anything that you didn't get to do that you had wanted to, but you didn't have time?
You didn't see King Lear.
Yeah,
that's a bummer.
and the haggis.
On the haggis, yeah. You know, I think it would have been nice to have a little more time to not be doing so much. You know, a few more days at home. But the time I was at home was great. As I shared before, I went through a lot of access and kind of relived my story. So that I never had time to do. So that was delightful. Yeah. So it was really a full and fulfilling summer. Yeah. Any other questions? Who else has been to Scotland? Oh, a lot of people. Yeah. Okay. Well, it's definitely worth doing. Yeah, right? Well, again, thanks for having me talk to anybody individually if you want to share your stories of travel or ask questions. But again, thank you so much. Thanks for letting me go and welcoming me home.